Today on Locked On Canadiens, we have a very special guest. We're going to be talking about Kirby Dach. We're going to be doing a little bit of analysis, all the prospects we're excited about. It's part 1 of 2 episodes with a fantastic guest, and it's coming up in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens.
For Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 669.
Oh,
Scott?
yeah, that's on me. It's very nice. It's our 6th really nice episode of our career here. So
we've done this 6 times.
This is beautiful.
You were off your game.
This isn't the first time I've screwed up the 69 intro either. It's happened several times, and you think I would have learned by now. We've been doing this for almost 700 shows.
I do all the odd episodes too, so it's always me going 69 and then waiting, and then Scott is like, what's going on here? All right. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. We're your hosts. My name is Laura Saab, also known as The Active Stick, and Scott Matlove Habs on Eyes on the Prize joins us. But I want to introduce our guest real quick, Sebastian High, who I discovered through a retweeted thread on Twitter about why the Kirby Dach signing is not something that Habs fans should be worried about or panicking about. The OHL scout or an OHL scout for DobberProspects, Sebastian High, joins us today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm very happy to be here. So thanks so much for inviting me.
For those of you listening, we are recording this on Sunday morning on an extremely hot day in Montreal. We've had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're so thrilled that our guest could join us all the way from the other side of the pond. And so why don't you talk a little bit about, how long you've been a Habs fan, why you started doing scouting and analysis, because I really want to introduce people to your work and kind of how you approach the way that you work.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up a Habs fan because I grew up in Montreal, so it's kind of a given at that point. I wasn't born in Montreal, but moved there when I was 3.5, so very much a Montrealer. And my family isn't really one of hockey fans, and I never really had too many friends that were also hockey fans, but I was always a hockey fan, so I always watched the Habs play. And yeah, in terms of getting into scouting, I mainly started during the pandemic when I had nothing to do, and the 2020 draft was coming up, and I decided to start researching the prospects because I had a bunch of free time and I love hockey, and I started reading everything I could on all the prospects. And the draft rolled around, and I had a great time looking at who went where and whatnot. And then for the 2021 draft, I actually started watching some players. Wasn't able to get my hands on too many games in that year, but it was more than just reading at that point. It was also watching some games, but then it was really in the past year where I've gotten very much into scouting yes, of course I'm reading everything out there because I want to hear other perspectives, but my opinions on players are formed on what I see of them and what I watch of them, because I watched a lot of hockey in the last year, on top of watching basically every Habs game, probably at least 70 of the 82. On top of that, just countless junior hockey games. And yeah, so I was just scouting on my own for most of the year. And then in March, I applied at DobberProspects to be the Habs scout. So if you're familiar with DobberProspects as a website, every NHL team has their own page where all the prospects are listed with a rating of both their upside and then their NHL certainty. And I applied for that and I got it. And I was so pumped because I was like, I can write updates on Habs prospects who I'm already very familiar with. And I get to also rank them in terms of how I perceive them in terms of upside and how certain they are to make the NHL. And that was kind of my into Dobber. And then I picked up also the role of writing a monthly article on the WHL. And then on my birthday, so in late May, I got a DM from Itu Siltanen, who's the head scout at Dobber, inviting me to join the team for the upcoming season. And of course, I gladly took that on. And on top of just that, I also was able to contribute to the final Dobber rankings for like the 2022 draft, which I thought was actually very, very generous of them, considering I was like, I joined them like 1 week before they made their final rankings in the meeting. And I was expecting to just sit in the meeting and listen, but they wanted my input, and I got Frank Nazer up to number 4, so I got my job done at the Dobber meet.
And Scott likes hearing that.
I do.
Yeah.
He was high on my list as well, assuming they weren't.
He's my number 2.
Right.
He's my number 2. I love Frank Nazer. Yeah. But yeah. So that was kind of my into scouting, was just posting thing on Twitter, right? Just being very active on Twitter, and then I got involved with Dobber. And the reason I actually got into Dobber was because Hadi got a DM me saying there's an opening at Dobber if you want to get in here. So that was also great. But yeah, no, it's been a very, very fun year.
And honestly, it's super exciting. And I just want to like really quickly ask you kind of how you kind of approach the video analysis, because that's how we know you, right? Your thread came across my Twitter account, and then I read through it, and you're very, very careful in sort of breaking things down video by video, frame by frame. So how did you get started doing that? In fact, we talked about how you got started. How do you approach that? I mean, to me, it seems like a mountain of work, and it's pretty tricky. I myself would not be able to handle video analysis threads. So tell us a little bit about that, please.
Well, the video analysis threads, oh God, voice crack. The threads are basically just kind of showing just my process in scouting. So they take a bit more time because I have to actually like get the screen grabs and edit them together and whatever. But it's really just how I would regularly scout a game, right? And so it's, instead of just jotting down a note and writing it down, I'm taking the actual clip itself. And yeah, so I'm mainly looking in terms of players. The things that I personally value the most in players are things that are a lot more difficult to teach, right? So, for instance, skating is a great thing. You want good skaters, but skating is also an attribute that you can really develop quite extensively with a player. For instance, Nick Suzuki was not a great skater when he was drafted by Vegas, and he's a pretty solid skater at this point in his career. Like if you just keep working at it year after year, you can get a mediocre skater to become an above average skater at the NHL level. So it's less of a deal breaker for me. However, how you read the game, your sense of timing and spacing, and if you have like the actual habit and ability to attack the slot, like that for me is a massive thing. And one of the reasons I adore Frank Nazer as a prospect, because he incessantly attacks the slot without like just every single play he attacks the slot, and it constantly creates high danger chances. And in the end, hockey is a game of high danger opportunities, right? And just tilting the ice in your team's favor, just being involved in play, right? Like passiveness is something that I look at a lot, because I think it's a very projectable element of, if you have a player that's very active in play, that's something that can project to the NHL level, and it can give players a higher floor of just, okay, even if it doesn't pan out with the skill and the intelligence and whatever, he can be a fourth liner at least, right? So those are some of the things I look at a lot. In terms of defensemen, I look at a big thing for me is their ability in the breakout, right? Like in the modern NHL, like, okay, you can have a couple defensemen on your team that struggle with the breakout, but if you have 6 bench-rots that ice the puck every second shift, that's a problem, right? And you need players that can progress the play. And like the Habs, for instance, at least pre-Martin St. Louis, were a team where the defensemen were never involved in transition at all. Like just even when it was a great skater like Jeff Petrie, just so uninvolved in transition. And it really limits what you can do, because at that point you have 3 forwards that have all the workload in transition. And if as a defenseman you are able to not only just like contribute, but actually really create from transition, that for me is a very important thing. But on the defensive side of things, again, defensive transition, actually stopping zone entries, because in the end, you don't have to be amazing in zone defense if the puck never gets into your zone. So it's also why I like Caden Gooley a lot, because that man does not allow controlled entries on his side of the ice. So yeah, I think those are some of the things I look for. And in terms of the video analysis threads, again, it's just the things that I would already look at in terms of just regular scouting when I'm just doing it on my own. And I think it was also just a thing that I hadn't seen before on Twitter, right? Like, you see a lot of articles and stuff or videos on YouTube of like video analysis, and they're awesome. Like Will Scouch, for instance, who I know that you've had on the podcast. He's amazing. He's such an intelligent person. He's so
awesome.
good. He's so good. But I'd never seen a video analysis in just a Twitter thread format, because one thing I've learned is whenever I write an article and I post it on Twitter, I get like maybe 10 likes or something, maybe 2 retweets. But these like threads, when it's just straight up just on Twitter in a thread, they get a lot more attention, and which is obviously just great to see, because I'm getting more of my work out there. But it's also just fun to see the amount of interaction and just discussions that are happening from these threads, which is just very, very enjoyable.
It's honestly that's one of the things that I find it's a lot easier. You know, I've been talking about hockey for a decade, but when somebody breaks it down in that way, I think it's like you said, there's not a whole lot of that out there. But it's also easy for people to follow step by step, right? When you're trying to read a whole wall of text and trying to visualize at the same time, it's a lot harder. So this kind of breaks it down with text and screen grabs and all of that, which I really love. And we are going to talk about Caden Gooley, but it's going to be at the end of next episode, because the way we've planned this out is today we're going to talk about Kirby Dach and Lane Hutson. And then in our next episode, we're going to talk about Philip Masor. We're going to talk about Slafkovsky. Obviously, we can't not talk about him. And that's exciting. And then we're going to talk about the future of the Habs defense. That's all coming up in next episode. But today, the next thing we're going to discuss is Kirby Dach, because that is how I got introduced to your work. And also, I want Habs fans to feel a lot better about this trade. And that's all coming up in just one moment. But first, I want to tell you about something that I've been using as part of my daily life because I needed to take control of my health. Athletic Greens supports better sleep quality and recovery. It supports mental clarity and alertness. It's the one thing with all the best things. Athletic Greens uses the best of the best products based on the latest science with constant product iterations and third-party testing. With one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. The special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. And as you're listening to this on my birthday, aging is the most important part for me right now. Athletic Greens has all the things. And right now it's time for you to reclaim your health just like I did and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition, especially heading into the flu and cold season. It's just one scoop and a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements or anything like that to look out for your health. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NHL Network to take ownership of your health and pick the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was Kirby Dach, because obviously now it's a month ago on the draft floor, Bettman announces trades. Everybody thinks that the Habs have gone bold and traded up to get Shane Wright. Instead, what they'd done was trade Romanov away and traded for Kirby Dach in a 3-way trade. Anyway, everybody knows the details. And that was it was a couple weeks ago when I saw your thread come across my Twitter feed. And it made me feel a lot better about the Kirby Dach trade. And I wanted to ask you a little bit what were you looking for when you went into the analysis, and were you pleasantly surprised? Because I think a lot of things, what people forget is that not only is he just 3 years away from being a 3rd overall pick, he also had injuries that kind of derailed the development, and he was also in a really bad system in Chicago. Let's talk a little bit about what you've discovered when you were kind of studying Kirby Dach and how it went.
Yeah, well, I wasn't overly familiar with Dach before the trade. Of course, I'd watched him a few times, but I'd never scouted him specifically. So at the time of the trade, immediately I liked it because I was of the mind that Romanov's value was at an all-time high. The way I see, I think Alexander Romanov is going to be a maybe number 4 defenseman in the NHL, and to trade that for a 13th overall pick, in my view, was a really solid move because, again, he hadn't signed his next deal yet. This is where he was very, very movable. He's still very young, a very valued prospect, and I saw too many limitations in terms of his offensive involvement, his skill level, and his overall just like high-end hockey IQ that I thought maybe a number 4 guy, but anything beyond that in the lineup, I think would have been too big of a role, at least in the next couple of years. Again, with great development, everything can change, but I like the move a lot to move on from him. And to get Kirby Dach, who, again, prior to the thread, I was not overly familiar with, but he was a player that I knew was a great playmaker, had a great toolkit, probably shouldn't have gone 3rd overall in that draft, but still a high-end prospect. And again, it's the Chicago Blackhawks, right? Like, this is not an organization where players thrive typically, unless you're like an Alex DeBrincat, but that's not an issue anymore now. So it's great. But yeah, and then so when I started watching him, my expectation was something more along the lines of like Jesperi Kotkaniemi. And I was like, cool, we got our Kotkaniemi back, right? A 3rd overall pick, just 1 year later, limited production, 3rd line minutes, the whole thing. But what I saw was a lot more intriguing to me than Kotkaniemi. Kirby Dach is a tremendously intelligent player. He has a terrific sense of space and timing, and he just knows things very, very instinctively. A little bit like Shane Wright in that sense. Of course, look, I'd rather have Shane Wright than Kirby Dach. That doesn't need to be said, but just a very, very intelligent centerman who is also a terrific playmaker. So his like standout quality is his playmaking ability. He is able to manipulate pass angles. He adjusts his speed upon entering the offensive zone to create passing lanes, and he can hit his targets so accurately. And in terms of transition playmaking, I think he's immediately the best on the Habs. Like Nick Suzuki is a great passer, but in transition, I like him a little bit more as a shooter. But that's just me. But Kirby Dach really excels on passing and doing it while he's moving and while in motion, which is also a telltale sign of a higher end playmaker, that he doesn't need to be stationary and to hit his targets and to find his targets. And that makes me quite hopeful for him as a top 6 centerman. Of course, there's a lot of issues in this game. First and foremost, his defensive game is not very refined. Again, he's very intelligent, so I think that he can get there eventually, right? Because he scans very, very well. He knows where the opponents are in the defensive zone. He gets his stick in there quite often, but he's just not a very refined defensive player in terms of actually consistently applying pressure. He can lose his man at times. But again, this is something that you see with most young players, and it takes time to develop these types of habits. So I'm not overly concerned with that. But in my thread, the big thing I pointed out with Kirby Dach in terms of what he needs to improve and what I think the Habs are already working on is specifically the depth in his skating, in his stride. So his knee bend, which is a very specific thing to point out, but it really does affect so many aspects of his game. So first of all, his edge work as a skater is terrific, but his actual speed is a bit limited because he just doesn't get the depth that he needs in his stride, and it makes the strides a bit shorter, a bit more shallow. And again, especially as a guy who's 6'3", you need to use that power that you have with that size to propel yourself forward. As a smaller player, you can get away with some of those deficiencies in your stride mechanics while still achieving a high speed, but Kirby Dach does not have that advantage because of his size. And beyond that, he's big. He can play physically. He's laid some big hits, but because he's fairly upright in his stance, smaller opponents just get underneath him and they can just leverage him, right? Just simple physics, right? Just getting underneath and out leveraging your opponent. And even though he's stronger than them, they win the puck battles because he just doesn't get low often enough because, again, his stride is fairly upright. And also with his shooting mechanics, for instance, again, the wrist injury plays a big role here. That has to be said. But it's also, again, if you get lower when you're shooting, you can get more power behind it. And he doesn't do that, right? So I think if the Habs can really, really focus in on the depth of his stride, I think it's going to be a bit of a domino effect in this game, and you're going to see a lot of things change. Another big thing is also just his ability to play inside pressure, which also has a bit to do with that physical leveraging that I was mentioning. And he needs to learn how to consistently use his size advantage, because it is an advantage in the NHL. Like I love smaller players. We'll get to Lane Hutson next, and I adore that kid. But if you're 6'3", you do have an advantage in the NHL game, and Kirby Dach needs to learn how to leverage that.
And I love that you mentioned Lane Hutson, because I didn't plan it that way. It's just we put Lane Hutson in this episode along with Kirby Dach. But the one thing that you hit on that was so important to me is it's something that we talk about a lot on the show. Like, size for size's sake does not work in today's NHL. That is like 2001 NHL.
Exactly.
Right now, it's what you do with the size. And I'm sorry, Scott, I cut you off.
My thought is, with everything that Sebastian just said here, is that he needs skating refinement and some shot refinement and just, using his body. The Canadiens have invested so much this offseason in player development. Adam Nicholas, even bringing in Marie-Philippe Poulin for the prospects.
Those two are massive.
They can get him to there. It's not going to be, an instant change. And this will apply to Slavkovsky. What we're going to talk about tomorrow a little bit is the tools are there. It's just stop using a wrench when you need, something else for this situation, and refine what they're doing. And it feels like they're betting on being able to unlock that next level potential with these player development pieces. And Doc's 21 years old? That feels like a pretty safe bet. Fresh start, new team, all this. I don't know what Chicago invested in player development, to be honest, so I can't really, slander them unfairly for that. But we know Montreal is going for this. This feels like a very promising step forward for someone who has all the tools they're likely looking for. Yeah, they had to lose Kotkaniemi, but like you said, they got Kirby Dach a year later, and he might be more what they are looking for in this system right now.
And we're going to turn our attention to a small player now, since we already brought him up, short king Lane Hutson. And in just one moment, we are going to talk about all things Lane. But first, I want to tell you all about Built Bar. If you haven't tried the Built Puffs, you're really missing out. What is Built Bar? It is a protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. It is delicious. And the puffs they have this marshmallowy filling, and they're covered in amazing real chocolate. They've got like a chocolate chip cookie dough flavor. They've got all kinds of, they had a churro flavor at one point. All you got to do is check out built.com to find out what their latest flavors are. I love Built Bar. I have them on the go as a breakfast. Scott takes them hiking. Sometimes at 3 p.m. I need to pick me up. I'm losing my energy during my day job. I'll just have a Built Bar because it is low in sugar, high in protein, and always, always, always delicious. So if you want to check out Built Bar, try one of those amazing flavors, go to built.com and enter LOCKED15 for 15% off your order. That is built.com. And the promo code is LOCKED15 for 15% off your order. And now it is the point in the show where we talk about my people, the short people, and Lane Hutson. If you've listened to the show at all, you'll know that we were both really excited with that pick. And as a lot of our listeners pointed out, getting him where the Canadiens did is a steal, right? You just referred to some of the advantages that smaller players have. And I feel like Lane Hutson kind of knows and takes advantage of the advantages. Like in today's NHL, we are still talking about larger players. We did do a little bit of a deep dive on him a little bit earlier. And one of the aspects of his game that our friend Paul Zuck talked about was, he kind of needs to play a lot more minutes against those larger players that he's going to be facing in the NHL to kind of develop more of those instincts. But I'm curious, because you just posted your Lane Hutson analysis thread the day before we recorded this. It was brand new. I was hoping it would come out before we started so that I could take a look at it before we started recording. And you know what? I think we're all in on this guy. We want to temper our expectations, but I just, at this point in time, like, he's just been drafted. He hasn't even started in the NCAA yet. What are the things that we can get excited about Lane Hutson as a prospect?
A lot. I mean, look, I had this guy ranked 11th overall, and I watched a lot of Lane Hutson tape to be sure of that ranking. Like my rankings have had quite a few hot takes. Like I had Brad Lambert at 3, Frank Nazar at 2. I had Noah Ustlin at like 7, Denton Matejchuk at 8, right? Jagger Firkus was at 13. That kid's awesome too. But I had Lane Hutson like one spot ahead of Matthew Savoy, and that I haven't seen a single ranking from anyone that's had Hudson in the top 15. The highest I think I've seen is like Scott Wheeler that I think had him at like 17, 18. So yeah, I like him a lot. Lane Hutson, in my view, was the most dynamic defenseman in the entire draft class. He has some competition with Matejchuk and Mintyukov there, but Lane Hutson, he with the puck on his stick in the offensive zone, he is so shifty. He has a great sense of pressure. Like I know I was saying like he senses like sensing pressure and timing and spacing. I was saying that with Doc. Lane Hutson is elite at that. Like he has Lane Hutson for me was a top 3 and like most intelligent player in the entire draft class. He's so intelligent, and he needs to be, because he's not just small. Like this kid is tiny. He's 148 pounds, right? Like he is small with like, I don't know if I want to go all like capitals or all lowercase there, but depending on what you want there. But he's a small guy, and as I was saying, I love small players. I think that they're highly undervalued in the NHL, and his size is the only reason he was available for the Habs at 62 overall. But there are extra hurdles with that, and with smaller players, some of the main things I look for are, how do you play under physical pressure? Because if you crumble under physical pressure as an undersized player in junior hockey, you're going to have a really tough time adapting to professional or even like NCAA hockey, right? Like it's going to be rough. And Lane Hutson doesn't just do okay under physical pressure. He thrives under it, because what he loves to do is draw in pressure. And because he has the foresight, the scanning, and like the shiftiness and the hands to get around that pressure with incredible ease. He loves his little shoulder fake. He does it basically like 20 times a game, is his shoulder fake. And it looks so simple. And like, again, it's like a 50-50 of what direction he goes in, but it works like 90% of the time because he reads his opponent, and whatever direction opponent goes in, he goes the opposite way. It's just like in soccer or football, and how a goalie would or how a penalty kick, in how a player would read the goaltender, right? Like Robert Lewandowski, for instance, he always reads where the goaltender goes, and then he decides where he shoots afterwards. And Lane Hutson does the exact same thing when he's one-on-one against a forechecker, and he's very, very good at it. And I think that it's a very projectable element. Even when players try to play the body, he's so shifty. He can bounce off it and get around and keep possession, and he bolts up the ice. And Lane Hutson is a great passer. He has great hands. He's really a multi-threat player with the puck, right? Like he's not very predictable at all, and he can't be with his size again, right? And he's so much fun. Again, there are a lot of hurdles, and ranking him at 11 was like, it's really me putting my like, I'm sticking my neck out for him, because it is riskier, right? Like if I wanted to be safe, I would put him at like 20 or something. But I believe in his high end skill set, and paired with his high end hockey mind so much that I really do believe that he's going to hit. And again, with the Habs development system, as you were saying, Adam Nicholas, I think, was a terrific hire. Marie-Philippe Poulin, after she was hired, I had a massive stupid grin on my face for the next 2 hours. I'm just so excited to have her in this organization. And yeah, I think Lane Hutson is going to be an extremely fun player. Look, his floor is like a Sami Niku type of player, where he puts up crazy numbers in the AHL, but just doesn't quite click in the NHL. But if he hits, like, this is a Quinn Hughes type of player. And if the Habs get that at 62 overall, when he put up the numbers they did with the US NTDP and just looked as dynamic as he did in his draft year, that's going to be a home run for the Habs. And Hudson's a player that excites me so much. I also live streamed the draft, so I have a clip of my reaction to the Hudson pick, and I was very excited, to say the least.
He was a player that when we were doing our pre-draft episodes and we had on, Tony Ferrari scouting, we had a lot of scouting writers and content creators, and a lot of them were really high on Lane Hutson. And we were sort of getting really, really excited. And we thought, he'd go sort of between the 33rd pick and wherever the Habs picked next. And I was getting really nervous when he was available to the Habs at that point. I was just like, this is highway robbery. And again, we have to temper our expectations. We're really, really excited. But I think consistently, everyone we've spoken to has had a similar viewpoint to, whereas he is one of the most skilled players in this draft. He might be one of the most intelligent defensemen in this draft. And it's just his size that has been preventing him from going higher and for more teams calling for him. And if the Canadiens can continue to to exploit market inefficiencies like that, if anyone's listened to this podcast before, I say that all the time. I mean it very, very strongly in terms of Lane Hutson. And now we are going to wrap up this episode because we still have to talk about Slavkovsky. We have to talk about Meshar and the Habs defense future. And all that's coming up on tomorrow's episode. But first, make sure you are subscribed to this podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube, or both if you like, in order to make sure you get our next episode with Sebastian High, because I'm just so excited about the way this episode went. I can't wait to hear about all these other players. In the meantime, you can find him on Twitter at _Sebastian, Sebastian with an A, Sebastian. Because I know we're in Quebec, so a lot of them are Sebastien. It's Sebastian. And you can find his work at DobberProspects, and you can listen to more of his analysis on our very, very next episode. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you on Wednesday.